Gun, a launch title for the Xbox 360. One of Neversoft's very small handful of games that wasn't either a Tony Hawk or a Guitar Hero title. A fairly popular game at the time, but one that was nearly deleted from the consciousness of the medium as soon as Red Dead Redemption 1 released. This game was a pretty big deal at the time, purely because Neversoft itself was also such a big deal. To see them doing something new was a shock for sure, and myself and a lot of others were delighted to see that Gun more or less followed the same core structure that the Tony Hawk games had been using, only in an open-world American Western setting. Familiar, yet fresh. Why we were glad that it took on the Tony Hawk structure, I couldn't tell you today. I feel like at the time we thought their brand of writing was funny, and that the arcade-style pacing was snappy in a way that made it feel easy to just sort of keep playing. Even after beating the game, which can probably be finished in about 2 hours if you skip side content, it was just such a comfortable game to keep sinking time into, just like the Tony Hawk games. But today? Well, today it's a bit of a different story. Gun is a strangely sparse, but also cluttered experience by today's standards, which is a bit of a surprise. The Tony Hawk games are mostly anything but sparse, because the mechanical structure is so deep. Someone would assume Gun would be the same, but it's not. The best place to start is probably with the story. Our main character is a young man by the name of Colton White. He's pretty devoid of a personality, honestly. At the beginning, he's on a bit of a journey with his pa, Landon Ricketts. We get a brief glimpse at the fact that Landon is up to something, before the riverboat the two of them are on is attacked. During the attack, Landon realizes there's really no easy way out for them both, so he pushes Colton off of the boat to save him, but not before revealing that he's not actually Colton's father. From here, the story is more or less on hold while a bunch of mostly unrelated events occur. A lot of the game consists of trying to find out who was really behind the attack, what they really wanted, and why Landon seemed to already understand what was going on, with a side of who is Colton if he's not Landon's son. But for the most part, a lot of the missions are only tangentially related to that core plot. Part of me just wants to blame this on the times. This isn't really too different from the other open-world games from that era. Taking from GTA's playbook, a lot of games emphasized introducing new characters every 5 to 10 missions. You'd do missions for one person, then switch to another strand and do missions for someone else. On and on this would go until usually it would try to all come together in a pretty ham-fisted way, where a lot of these characters are forced into the climax. But honestly, I think the way Gun is structured has more to do with Neversoft's specific style than anything else, because it's identical to the Tony Hawk series. And since the Tony Hawk games often only had you doing 1 or 2 missions for each character, the pacing became incredibly disjointed. It worked in Tony Hawk because the story was rarely trying to do anything more than give context to why you might want to skate a specific spot or city. In Gun, this definitely doesn't work. I wouldn't say the plot is absolutely awful, but it certainly doesn't inspire anything in particular other than some laughs at how insensitive the game can be in its portrayal of the times. When Red Dead Redemption 2 has a character say the word, it feels weighty and meaningfully mean-spirited. The character says it because they want to convey a lack of certain respects for the person or people they're referring to. Them saying it is more about that character than anything else. Gun, by contrast, takes the isn't it funny that this guy's a racist route. The intentions are good, and intentions do matter, but it misses the mark because it's usually used purely as a punchline. Rather than add much to the character actually using the derogatory term, it's just used as a joke about how racist the times were. Bottom line is, while they can be fun-ish at times, the characters and events of the story are really just cliches. They don't have much character of their own, instead relying purely on Western archetypes. So if the story isn't the best, what's left worth experiencing? Well, I'd say Gun is worth trying for 3 types of people. There are the Tony Hawk fans who never played Gun. You might get a strange feeling of deja vu from Gun that you could potentially find fun for a while if you fit into this category. Then there are the people who want to play what almost amounts to a Doom 2016 style arena shooter, but in third person and in a western setting, and really dumbed down. And finally, there are the people who really enjoy Red Dead Redemption and want to see where I personally think a lot of the inspiration for Redemption came from. I don't think they took much from Revolver. I think they were looking at Gun for a lot more of their ideas. We've already discussed the first point out of these 3, and therefore the type of person who might be interested in the game for Tony Hawk related reasons. So how about the second one? You might see people talking about Gun as if it's a pretty janky, slow, and awkward third-person shooter that doesn't really hold up. And that makes a lot of sense, because the game does seem to be trying to push you in a slower, more methodical direction. But if you really want to enjoy Gun, throw that out of the window. Gun is best when you're strafing around, slinging dozens of bullets a second into the swaths of fodder thrown at you. Now, the game won't start out like this. Gun starts slow. It gives you several different types of weapons to work with, most of which have huge reload times, limited ammo, and very specific jobs they can accomplish. It even has a lean function, which is cool in theory, but you can forget about using it if you want to enjoy this game. For the first hour or 2, you'll be doing a lot of fighting with the game's design because these days it really doesn't work the way they wanted it to. It feels sort of like it's trying to be a cover shooter before Gears of War standardized the design of them. But the game becomes surprisingly fun once you start upgrading your pistols. Focus on giving them more damage dealing potential and faster reloads, and it becomes an entirely different game. One design quirk you might notice early on is that the guns almost all have a large aiming radius. The reticle is huge, and unlike most modern games, if any part of the enemy is in any part of the interior of the reticle, your shots will connect, so use this to your advantage. This does make most of your arsenal useless after a while. Shotguns can be useful in certain situations, and other guns function well in set pieces they were intended to be used in. But the best options will be your pistols, because they can become really strong, have good range, have a huge reticle, and by the end of the game, their reload is almost instant. So you ultimately end up feeling more McCree than Marston. You may feel inclined to try and focus on your character's stats as well, but I couldn't feel any difference as I leveled them up. What really matters instead is the upgrades from the shops. It's interesting because despite trying to make something more weighty and thoughtful, Neversoft revealed how tied to arcadey design they really were, because playing Gun in this way changes a bland, clunky mid-2000s shooter into a decently fun little arena shooter of sorts. As for the fans of Red Dead, who maybe just want to see where some of Redemption's influence came from, well, just look at it. Now, a lot of what's going on here is obviously made up of cliches and tropes from the spaghetti western genre. You've got your gambling dens, prostitution, Native American tribes, an emphasis on the West dying to make way for modernization, train robberies, dynamite, six-shooters, horses, and on and on. But there are a lot of side quests and such that are also eerily similar to Red Dead. It's set in an open world. You've got a farmer you can help out, where you do things like herd cattle. You've got side quests focused on hunting legendary animals. You've got poker, which you can cheat at if you choose to. You've got a Deadeye-style slow-motion system for gunslinging your heart out, which I'm aware is also in Revolver, but just go with it. Taken as a whole, you could probably convince most people who don't know what Gun is that it's the predecessor to Red Dead if they also don't know about Red Dead Revolver already. With that said, don't expect something as refined as even the first Redemption title. Hunting is kind of junk, for example. You literally cannot kill your target until you get close enough to them, and you have to get really close. but once you do, one arrow to the face takes them down. So every hunting mission is identical outside of where you find the animal itself. For some reason, there's an upgrade that allows you to scalp enemies you've defeated as well. Again, insensitivity aside, you might think this could be used to sell said scalps as some sort of trophy to make money on the side. I could have swore that was the case all these years later as I picked the game up again for this review. Nope, they do absolutely nothing. There was probably a mechanic tied to them at one point, but whatever it is, it's not here now, so scalping just kind of opens you up to enemy gunfire. Poker is fun initially because the first set of tournaments allow you to cheat. Each round is incredibly swift, you can finish a hand in about 10 seconds, and cheating gives it a fun edge. But the second set of tournaments is just frustrating. The AI is much more timid with their chips, and they'll do all they can to try and keep themselves in the game rather than focus on winning. So without the ability to cheat by hiding a card like you could in the first set of tournaments, this is, well, it's just poker. 100% completion of the game relies on completing all of the tournaments, meaning you either have to get really lucky or learn to be good at poker to reach completion. And not just poker as a game, but poker as a form of gambling related to, not losing all your chips. Not really what I would call fair design, considering it's asking you to learn an entirely new game and for no real reward besides the money, which you can get anywhere else, and there's more in the game than you actually need to buy everything. Overall, the biggest difference between Gun and Redemption 1 is the same difference between Redemption 1 and Redemption 2, the state of the industry it was created in at the time. There's a big difference between the design of games back then and games now. Let's take this pair of side missions from Gun. The first sees you rescuing cattle from some rustlers, and the second sees you and the rancher escorting the cattle to town. If you did a similar pair of missions in Red Dead 1 in 2010, or today in Red Dead 2, you'd head to the location of the rustlers, kill them all, free the cattle, and then maybe some more rustlers would show up while you're taking the cattle back to the ranch. This will usually be a smooth experience these days. While you're trying to shoot the second pack of rustlers, Red Dead 1 or 2 will likely put the cattle on autopilot. It'd be a scripted event, so the developers would be careful to keep your attention on what they feel is the most exciting part of the mission. They wouldn't want you to have to fiddle with cattle positioning while trying to gun down a bunch of bandits and avoid your horse falling off a cliff or whatever. In these theoretical examples, it might still feel like you're manually controlling your horse, herding the cattle, and shooting the rustlers all at once, but under the hood, subtle shifts in AI behavior and other clever systems would be helping alleviate the burden, similar to what I talked about in my editorial about Redemption 2 designing around boredom. Gun, likewise, comes from a time where that type of precision was expensive in terms of monetary cost, development time, computing cost while trying to deliver each frame as you play, software required to create such complex systems and scripting, expertise required to do it, etc. So instead, similar missions from back then generally will either become an absolute chore because you receive none of the help a modern game would have given to focus the experience, or, like in Gun's actual side missions related to retrieving stolen cattle specifically, they usually just keep the mission simple. So in the initial mission in Gun, you simply go to the location on the radar, kill the rustlers, and then you more or less just get to spend 2 minutes riding slowly back to the ranch with the cattle. Nothing more happens. Nothing of interest keeps your attention. It's just a 30-second ride there, 15 seconds of fighting, and 2 minutes of dead time as you head back. It's not until a later mission in the same strand where you fight more rustlers, but in this mission, the rancher automatically keeps the cattle on track for you perfectly, meaning they might as well not even be there, they're just set dressing. Neither of these missions has any dynamism. As a small aside, the difference between Redemption 2 spending a lot of its time on mundane moments and what Gun is doing here is that Redemption 2 makes this a core concession to pace events, contextualize its survival design, and to add weight to the experience. There's reason behind it and other decisions that all reinforce this as a core idea of the game. Gun has a 2-minute ride back to the ranch, because the ranch is that away, and they didn't think to just skip the journey back to avoid spending your time unnecessarily. I really don't think it was a design decision so much as just a poorly thought out conclusion to said mission. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the final mission, since it's such a hot mess. In trying to be grand, climactic, and the ultimate challenge, it ends up being frustrating, broken, and unclear at times. It starts out with you taking control of a cannon on a trolley, so more or less an auto-scrolling turret section. Yay! Not inherently bad, obviously, but the cannon can be so damn inaccurate that it becomes a giant pain. Meanwhile, you are offered no extra protection while on the cannon, meaning you're a wide open target that's just sitting out there to be shot at the whole time. Honestly, for much of it, you're much better off just running through the camp in the caverns using your trusty pistols. But even then, there's just too much fire coming your way at times, and not enough places to maneuver, meaning either way you do it, it becomes a race to the next checkpoint before you're killed. This section can take a good 15 to 20 minutes or longer if you're really struggling, and I can't really say any of it was that fun. After this, you've got a short run through a small underground village, which isn't bad. It's more of what you've been doing most of the game. Then you get to the boss. The rules for this guy aren't exactly clear in either of the two phases. The game does try to give you hints to lead you in the right direction, but some of the minor choices muddy things up and confused me at least. The first phase requires you to use dynamite to activate these geysers of sorts in the ground. Big Boss over here is immune to damage from your weapons, so you need to lead him to a geyser, toss dynamite to activate it, and then the geyser will explode on him. Sounds simple, and it kind of is, but the problem is how much damage he and the geysers do to you. I 100% finished the rest of the game before this mission, meaning I had max stats, and he still was capable of draining 9/10 of my health in less than a second with his gun. He throws dynamite as well, which can do a lot of damage on its own, but if the dynamite happens to hit a geyser near you when it explodes, you're instantly killed more or less every time. So you end up having to coax him over to geysers, while timing and aiming dynamite in a moderately strict but still kind of vague window, while trying to frantically avoid his line of sight, while also watching for the tiny hard to see against the background sticks of dynamite he lobs, and while carefully avoiding the geysers when he throws said dynamite. With the way it was designed, it doesn't really work terribly well. This was once again a moment in a game that I remembered being tough when I was younger, that I was positive I was for sure good enough to breeze through now, and once again I was proven wrong. Same goes for his second phase. In this, Naked Snake is up on a shelf, walking back and forth while shooting you and throwing more dynamite. He also summons fodder enemies from the other side of the room that love to gank you when you're preoccupied. The goal is to use your Deadeye to shoot the dynamite out of the air right after he throws it. Do this enough times and the cavern will begin to collapse on good old Jack, finishing the game. But once again, the same issues apply. He does tons of damage. You have even less cover than before because he has height advantage. The geysers still instantly kill you if his dynamite blows one up near you. His cronies are now a regular nuisance, and the rules aren't entirely clear. The game tells you that you need to shoot the dynamite he throws out of the air. But what it doesn't tell you is that you're screwed if you don't also unload chamber after chamber of bullets into John. If you don't, he won't get staggered, won't get angry, and therefore won't throw the right dynamite. That's correct. His constant barrage of 3 sticks of dynamite don't damage the cavern for some reason. Only when he calls you a bitch or whatever, and then throws a single stick, will it progress the fight. So a boss that was immune to gunfire last round, and now has no health bar at all, suddenly requires you to go all on him before he'll open himself up to damage. And shooting him requires that you're in his line of fire as far as I can tell, meaning if you're not extremely careful, you'll die before you can even say time paradox. Gun isn't the greatest game. It's also not the worst. I'd say it does still kind of hold up, but only if you ignore half of what it offers and play it more like you'd play a hybrid between Tony Hawk and Doom, I guess. Even if you complete everything, you're only looking at about 8 hours. Might have been upsetting to a lot of people who paid $50 on PS2 and whatnot in 2005, and even more upsetting to those who paid the $60 premium on the 360, though when I bought the PS2 version brand new back then, it didn't bother me personally, but I'm sure it bothered a lot of others. However, since that premium price isn't a factor today, I'm mostly just glad to see it didn't waste too much of my time. I'm much happier that it was 8 hours instead of 30. It's a serviceable, albeit clunky and mediocre product today. So it really is up to you whether you fit into a category that could get something out of Gun. But what do you think? Have you played Gun? Have you played it recently? How well do you think it held up? And if you haven't played it, does it seem like something that would interest you? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.